Hello, everyone. I'm Martha Tedeschi, the Elizabeth and John Moores Cabot Director of the Harvard Art Museums. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome our museum fellows, as well as special guests of Beyond Walls and other Harvard colleagues and supporters who are joining us for today's program. We're very glad you could join us for a presentation that is sure to inspire each and every one of us. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that Harvard University and the Harvard Art Museums are situated on the traditional and ancestral territory of the Massachusetts people. We collectively recognize the long history of the land our institutions occupy today. We strive to honor this relationship and to make Indigenous narratives more prominent in our galleries and our programming. We've been especially looking forward to today's program with Al Wilson and Beyond Walls and the chance to explore its timely and critical focus on strengthening community through art. The deeply troubling challenges that have continued to impact our communities over the past year, the many serious effects of the pandemic, of racism, unemployment, and gun violence in particular, have urgently called on every organization to engage in the very difficult work of examining our own part in perpetuating systemic inequalities. We are called to commit to a different path forward, one in which we all play a role in helping to heal our fellow citizens and to make real and lasting contributions to social and racial justice. At the Harvard Art Museums, we're taking concrete steps to meaningfully and honestly address how our institution, especially our collections, but also our spaces and human resources, can best be deployed as agents of positive change and problem solving, both within our campus community and for those we serve locally, nationally, and globally. We often refer to the Harvard Art Museums as Harvard University's front porch. My colleagues and I are thinking a lot about the promise and potential of that, what it really means to be a space between public and private realms, a crossroads of campus and community, a space for facilitating interactions between our diverse communities and for fostering greater awareness and appreciation of each other. Today, we're excited to shine a light on a local organization based in Lynn, Massachusetts, a historically working class former industrial town that is the 9th largest city in Massachusetts and the largest and most ethnically diverse on Boston's North Shore. Beyond Walls stands out as a model for the entrepreneurial ways that it has positioned art and artists to help solve persistent civic problems, to revitalize and change long-held narratives about the city of Lynn, and to amplify all the voices of its diverse community members. Perhaps best known for its murals and its annual street art festival, this past year, Beyond Walls pivoted its focus in real time to a variety of new art and design initiatives in response to the pandemic and the racial injustice that hit the Lynn community, particularly its youth, especially hard. At the helm of Beyond Walls is its tireless and visionary founder and CEO, Al Wilson. Al started Beyond Walls in 2016 as a purely volunteer-run effort, and the organization became an independent 501c3 nonprofit in 2018. The extensive and measurable impact that Al and his team have accomplished in just this short period of time makes it all the more impressive. You may remember how disheartened we were last April, almost to the day, to have to postpone due to COVID a fellow's visit to Lynn, Massachusetts, to meet Al and to experience Beyond Walls work firsthand. Now more than ever, we can't wait to reschedule that visit as soon as it's safe to do so. So please consider today's virtual visit a prelude. For now, we're extremely thrilled to have Al with us to share the organization's journey over these last few years and give us a glimpse of what's to come. The insights we gain today into this organization's remarkable success are sure to spark our own ideas and motivation for activating the arts to strengthen the fabric of our communities. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. For now, we ask that you keep your microphones on mute. We are allowing time at the end for conversation and questions, and so kindly ask that you hold all of your questions until then. At that time, we'll invite you to use the chat function to enter questions or comments, or you can simply raise your hand, unmute yourself, and ask your question directly. We have members of the Harvard Art Museum's team standing by to look for your raised hand if you prefer that route. So now it's my very great pleasure, with deep gratitude, to turn over the floor, the virtual floor, to Al Wilson. Al, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Martha, and to Anne and Kara and Liz and the team there for coordinating this. We were so disappointed that we couldn't host you last year at this time, and we are certainly looking forward to maybe some light at the end of the tunnel here and hosting you here in Liz, in Lynn in the near future. So thank you for having us, and it's great to be connected to the Harvard Art Museum Fellows and all the friends that have also joined this call. So, please let me know, Anne, that that we're actually on the screen, and I'll start presenting now.
Yes, you're good.
Yeah, good. So my background isn't in this space, running a nonprofit. Prior to this, my last two employers had me opening offices largely on the East Coast, one for a digital media company, and then a tech startup out of Chicago. I was familiar with Chelsea area of Manhattan, ended up having an apartment there just next to the High Line. I think many of the parties on the call will be familiar with the High Line there, but just an amazing activation of underutilized space. I also had opened an office in Miami, Florida, and became fascinated with the area of Wynwood, a former industrial zoned warehouse district, where in 2009, large-scale pieces of art were put up on some of the warehouse walls, and it quickly turned into additional pieces of art until I discovered it in 2014, when it was now 8 city blocks of art and had become the sort of cultural and art center of greater Miami, with cafes and restaurants and retail activity, as well as a variety of different housing suddenly cropped up, all within a very short period of time. That had me really become fascinated with the power of art and the creative economy and creative placemaking. And I attended a lecture at the Boston Architectural Center in the beginning of 2016, led by a gentleman named Mark Daly from a company over in the UK called Future City. And he spoke to an area that my family knows. My mom and dad are from the UK. My dad went to the London School of Economics in the 60s. Between my dad and my generation and me going to King's Cross, London to see punk bands in the 90s, I was amazed to see what King's Cross had become. And again, it was the power of art and large-scale street art that attracted Google to take out a 46,000 square foot headquarters for their European operations there. So I went over to King's Cross and checked it out. And then at the same time was playing soccer in the Lynn community, and was invited in to join some meetings that were happening here. And so this was mass development. Many of the parties will know, plays a sort of, they're like the VC arm of the state. And they had coined the term Gateway City for these former industrial cities of the Commonwealth. And you'd be able to quickly list them: Fall River, New Bedford, Lowell, Lynn, Massachusetts, Westfield, and others. But they coordinated a series of meetings in the downtown, really well attended by residents and business owners and managers, to talk about what they felt were some of the challenges of the downtown in Lynn. And the conversations ended up focusing on walkability. And for the second meeting, we really peeled back the onion as to what that meant. And many felt that there was a real need for additional lighting in the downtown, as well as the city had recently been awarded an art and cultural district by the state, And there was a real need to have large scale pieces of art installed in the downtown. And quite frankly, also a challenge with the narrative. Many on the call might be familiar with a ditty on Lynn, a song that I won't mention, but Lynn has many of the challenges of any former industrial city in the state. It just happens to have this song, and it's 20 minutes, 25 minutes away from every major news affiliate. So a bad story in Lynn gets covered as opposed to sending a truck to Westfield. And so that creates a continuation of a largely false narrative on the city. So 28 people came out of these meetings and formed as a completely volunteer committee, focused on addressing the desires for more artwork and lighting. And so we focused on really 4 projects initially. One was to bring in large scale street art that would be put up by artists that reflected the cultural identities of the city. Something that had really surfaced in these meetings, and I'll expand upon this later, was the need for lighting under 3 MBTA owned and operated bridges, the underpasses of which weren't lit and were causing challenges on the streetscape, high incidence of vehicle and pedestrian strikes in one case. So the desire to put up lighting there. And then through this work, we discovered a collector of vintage neon artwork. And so we could install this artwork in areas that the community had said needed to have additional lighting. And then finally, we randomly, in attempting to get lighting hardware donated from GE Lighting Division, we went in through GE Aviation. So GE Aviation is still the largest employer here in Lynn with just over 3,000 employees. At its height, it employed 45,000 people. They made the first jet engine manufactured in the US in 1942, and we were donated one of the first test engines of that series, one of 11. And we have a 1942 IA engine that we've fixed up and is actually here in our office and is ready to be installed in City Hall. So, we've ultimately taken on an awful lot of work, and it's a huge variety, always fed from the community as far as need, and then we take a creative lens to addressing that community need. All of it is actually here in Lynn, and we've done work now in 5 cities, but when we talk about Lynn, and Lynn being the 9th largest city in the Commonwealth, it has a very tight urban core. And we've actually focused much of our efforts within that core. So we are really looking forward to having the fellows and friends visit us. And it makes for a very interesting tour and a condensed tour through what is a really fantastic downtown. But I'll focus on some of our earlier work as well as our COVID-19 work that we did this last year for this presentation. So I mentioned the vintage neon artwork, and there's a reason why I'm not calling them signs. There is a sign ordinance in the city of Lynn, just like in many cities, that would prevent the hanging of neon signs. However, we were able to use all of the community meetings that had happened and what really the feedback had been for this need for additional lighting to then say that these are not actually signs. They're vintage neon pieces of artwork. They'd been in storage for 30, 40 years. They do not, the businesses that they once aligned to are no longer in business, and that we should be allowed to install them on buildings where the businesses, these do not align to any business activity within these buildings. We never thought that the city would agree to this, but lo and behold, they decreed that these are neon pieces of art and therefore did not fall under the sign ordinance, and we hung all 11 of them throughout the downtown, and they've really lit up the corners here in a really remarkable way, and we've had parties traveling quite some distance. There's actually a bit of a cult following amongst neon fans to come to Lynn and take photos of these. The underpass lighting. So this is a dynamic LED system that operates on 3 bridges here in the city now. We started work on this out of the gate in 2016, and we weren't actually able to finalize it and turn the lights on until 2018. There's a real variety to the infrastructure here. So this is the Central Square underpass, but you'll see the difference of the infrastructure here on Washington Street. In this case, the coffers actually have cinder blocks that are in place. And then finally, Market Street, which is also a very different underpass. This was the underpass that in those community meetings, we were shocked to hear how many people had been impacted. Either they'd been hit by cars here, or they had family members or friends that had been hit by cars. And remember, this isn't ancient history. This is 2016. So they were being hit by cars because there was no lighting under these bridges, and parties were crossing to get to these pillars, and then sort of using them as offensive linemen and sticking their heads out or coming out when they thought it was safe to do so, and getting clipped by cars that were traveling on average between 35 and 40 miles an hour. So the state heard this information, and then working with Mass DOT, heat mapped this area to find out that it was the 5th highest incident of vehicle and pedestrian strikes in the state. And so you can see the sort of difference of lighting this area for pedestrians makes. And now vehicles can clearly see parties walking under the bridge. It took a huge team to put this together. And when we finally turned on the lights, we announced that we were going to be turning them on. We had over 500 parties from Lynn turn out just for the activity of turning these lights on. But between Payette, architect team in Boston that did pro bono design work, Lamb Partners, and a lighting architect firm in Cambridge that did pro bono work, a huge amount of donated product from Philips, over $200,000 worth of hardware, and then perhaps most importantly, the gentlemen that are in this middle photo on the bottom here. This is International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW 103, who 12 of their members donated 10 weeks of free labor on this project from late fall 2017 through the winter into early spring of 2018 to install this. And just like all of our work, we involve youth in our work. And so we had 3 interns from Lynn Vocational Technical Institute, the local vocational high school, intern on this project. All 3 became electricians too with the union. So a real success story. As mentioned at the start of the call here, we're sort of most renowned for our street art festival that we've done every year up until the pandemic. Because we have such a diverse community, all of our literature is in Spanish, and often also additionally Khmer. We have a sizable Cambodian population here. It's actually the 3rd largest Cambodian population in the US after now greater LA. It had always been Lowell, Massachusetts, but it's LA, then Lowell, then Lynn, Mass. So sizable population, but really an awful lot of Dominican, Cambodian, Puerto Rican parties. We have a sizable Eastern European demographic here now. And so we've brought in a variety of artists over the years. We've also done some impact studies. So this was from our first year, our first festival. Really had never put up art before. We knew that the business community and the residents felt that there was this unfair narrative. So a focus was to get earned media. And we got coverage on Channel 4, Channel 5, Channel 7 News. Chronicle came out and did an entire show here. We had multiple articles in the Boston Globe, including the Boston Globe art section. It ultimately drew over 5,000 parties to come visit Lynn during that time period. And we had a tough time getting the point of sale data from more than 2 businesses, but 2 coffee shops here in the downtown were able to show us that they actually had $110,000 in incremental new sales over the year before, during our 14-day span, which is a sizable increase, especially when you consider this was our first festival. This is just a quick video of that first festival recap.
Just came downtown to check out the art.
And what do you think?
I
It's
love
awesome.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about time.
It changes the whole feel of downtown.
The best things about doing outdoor public art is that it is accessible.
I feel like I haven't seen that many people out in downtown Lynn like ever.
This project really brings people out into the street.
It was great to see people, young and old, different people from all over the city of Lynn coming down.
People see you, they talk to you, they share information about the town. I got the best history lesson that I could have ever gotten.
It's people of all ages coming out to see something new. They've been so excited, and that makes me really happy to be here.
It was one of the most exciting times, I think, in the city. You could feel the excitement building throughout the week.
I think these murals are some of the coolest things that have happened.
The murals have brought some sort of brightness.
I've never seen so many people be this excited about Lynn. Because I was seeing people happy that I haven't seen smile my whole life.
I've lived here all my life, and I think it's a great city. I think the artwork is definitely a huge plus. Huge plus.
When you talk about Lynn now, people talk about the murals, about the art.
People are definitely going outside the city bragging. We got these crazy murals. You should come and see it.
It's obviously good for the community if people coming out like that,
Inside the city of Lynn, people really taking a look at what the murals are about, but I think more importantly, taking a look at what Lynn's about.
I even noticed that, a lot of people are talking about Lynn, and not in a bad way like they used to talk about it.
It really started to change the perception in people's minds of what downtown is.
I feel like these murals give the people of Lynn pride. People can kind of claim it for themselves now. People of the city, when the artists were here, it was that's their mural. But now, they're gone and they left it for us. You know what I mean? So it's the city, and I feel like everyone just feels like they can be yeah, that's mine, that's from my home.
It's really about the people in the community.
Well, I think that there is now a responsibility for us to try and continue the work that we've been doing to bring public art more to the forefront in Lynn. But while doing so, making sure that the community is still represented.
Everyone wants more, and I think that's fantastic.
You can't come through the city by vehicle, on foot, or by train and not know, man, there's some really cool stuff going on in Lynn.
So I mentioned some of the populations and some of the cultures here in Lynn. This is a piece by Angoria, a Dominican artist, and a piece that's been particularly celebrated. One of the sort of outshoots of putting up this art is that we've worked on a resource that we're providing to Lynn Public School System that's lessons and lesson plans on the art and the artists, and it really works very well in sort of traditional social study themes. So history, geography, culture, and I'll show a quick video that maybe will expand upon that a little bit here with the artist Angoria.
Y básicamente todo viene de que mi madre, que se llama Patria, tiene un salón de belleza y toda mi vida he estado expuesto a lo que es salones de belleza, mujeres, rolos, blower, de todo. Venía haciendo un homenaje a la belleza dominicana, literalmente, Dominican Beauty, lo que la mujer dominicana no deja de ser y que no deja que ningún hombre la vea, es rolo. y obviamente esta expresión de orgullo de que, ¿por qué no? Yo me tengo que ver bien. Gracias.
So just as we've now installed over 100 pieces of art in 5 cities, and as each successive year, we've sort of perfected this, and this, it was clear from the get-go that size and scale and skill matter. But this is an example of one of the pieces. This is a piece by Smug One, and sort of the visibility and the size of the piece. This was a wall that had been sort of coveted for some time. Certainly the community had shared that they wanted a piece on this wall, and it actually features a resident in the building on the wall. This is the artist Smug One doing this. He did this piece in both aerosol and liquid paint on a 135-foot boom lift. The amazing thing is he did this. He freehanded this, so he took a photo of the resident and then freehand painted this piece in 6 days. So these artists are awfully impressive. Just some other artists. On the left is a piece by Wasbelder. Actually showcases 2 parties from Lynn. The party on the left is Jan Metzlinger. He actually created the shoe lasting machine, which kept Lynn, Massachusetts as sort of the shoe capital of the US. I know there's an awful lot of cities that claim that, some also in the Commonwealth, but Lynn certainly that was a big part of Lynn's industrial roots. On the right was a party that led a walkout striking for better working conditions in Lynn. On the right is a piece by Ad Fuel. This is a piece by Brian Byung from Cambodia. A piece by Helen Burr. This actually something that we realized as we put up the artwork was we didn't have someone that was in the art that was reflective of the older community that's here in Lynn, and this piece sits next to 3 towers of senior living. I've yet to drive by this piece without seeing a resident from those buildings outside looking at the piece. And the amazing thing is talking to those residents where they met Helen and they know the story. And the narrative is this is Helen's grandmother holding playbills that the grandfather created while he was a prisoner of war, and they did performances to help with morale. The grandfather has since passed, but the grandmother has these keepsakes. And the residents of the building know the story and tell me the story, but then tell me who they see in the piece and their story behind the piece. So it's part of the power of art, obviously. So we've involved youth throughout, whether it was youth programming, youth tours, and now youth tours connected with what we've dubbed this Classroom to the Streets program, this resource for middle school students here in Lynn that we're beta testing right now, but also youth involved in the arts. So this is Raw Artworks Good to Go team. This is an all-male group of boys that do public artwork. In this case, we brought in El Tono, who speaks 5 languages. He's a French street art legend. Based on the variety of youth and languages spoken within the group, to redo a wall, 249-foot long wall here that we did in 2018. And then every year at the end of the festival, we traditionally do a block party. So we're hoping to get back to having fun in groups, hopefully soon. You know, if you think about what had made Beyond Walls successful in the past, pre-pandemic, was bringing, you know, how we sort of our metric of success was, could we bring parties from all walks of life, different cultural backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, and bring them all together and have an experience, which is the exact opposite of what you should do during a pandemic. But we didn't want to go quietly into the night. There was certainly an opportunity to fund Beyond Walls to simply pay the team but not do projects. And that seemed like that would be the easy out. And so Beyond Walls really fought to still be active during this time. And if you think of the mission is to activate space to strengthen community. That's a really wide range of what that might cover. In this case, Beyond Walls got connected to the COVID-19 task force for the city, and then ultimately, in a deeper level, connected to the vulnerable population task force. And so the first thing that we knew, based on the data that was out there, the science that was out there, what the parties at Lynn Community Health Center, who is the health service provider for Greater Lynn, there was a real need for masks. And so working with the Beyond Walls board, we found 3 local seamstresses here in Lynn, and they created masks featuring in both adult sizes and youth sizes, featuring some of our sort of more beloved or most beloved murals. And we've donated over 1,500 of these masks, largely first to Lynn Youth, all the students at the YMCA, Boys and Girls Club, KIPP Academy, Girls Inc., etc., but then to essential workers and first responders. And then feedback that we were getting, again, through the connection that we had with the Vulnerable Population Task Force, My Brother's Table, which is the largest soup kitchen here in the North Shore, again, the Lynn Community Health Center, also the shelter and the YMCA, which was housing parties. They were seeing parties, homeless and semi-homeless, who without the public restrooms and the restrooms that they were utilizing in cafes and restaurants to wash their hands, they didn't have a means of washing their hands. In some cases, parties were seeing people that hadn't washed their hands in 2 or 3 weeks, and it was known that they were spreading the virus amongst their populations and their caregivers. So a real need for freestanding hand washing stations, which when Beyond Walls looked into, as you can imagine, we rent or purchase a lot of equipment during the course of the year. We found out no one had them. They were 18 to 24 weeks out. And so we made our own. So the first one that we made is the middle photo there. And it's pretty, it's a sink with a foot operating pump and a big tank. And we put it up outside Lynn Community Health Center. And in 24 hours, it had over 500 washes. So we then came back and sort of started a better design. Ultimately, we had 5 iterations, and the 5th is on the right. So freestanding, foot activated pump, hand wash, water and soap, LED lighting system, and just how amazingly active these were. We did these for free throughout downtown Lynn. The one up at Lynn Community Health Center, we were recording 2,200 hand washes every 4 days, uses 1/8 of a gallon wash per. But we did them again with Lynn Vocational Technical Institute students. We were featured in the Boston Globe front cover of the business section. And then these went, other cities came calling. So we started production of these in our machine shop, which is pretty bare bones here. And they're now as far away as Nashua, New Hampshire. So they were placed outside their social service locations. And then as we got further into the pandemic, and we really realized that, a core fabric of any of these communities is the mom and pop restaurants, and that they were sharing with the state that they were they were ready to go out of business. The state did a good job of clearing any of the bureaucratic hurdles and regulations that would stop serving outdoors. And so you saw a lot of these on the local level. Those municipalities were then tasked with figuring out how you could facilitate outdoor dining on what had traditionally been the public way. So here you have a product that we called Fold that we also started creating here in the office, again with Lynn Vocational Technical Institute students, just by way of sort of giving you dimensions. This is in in what is just slightly larger than a traditional parking space. But again, a stainless steel construction that we then installed on city streets. It allows for greenery, it allows for lighting, and again, these also went as far away as Nashua, New Hampshire. But and then finally, you know, we were all impacted during the pandemic, and it was a tough year. But perhaps none more so than Lynn, than youth, and in particular, we're very connected to the Lynn youth, who suddenly went without their second place. So they had home and they had school, and now they just had home. And Lynn wasn't necessarily really equipped for suddenly going to virtual learning. And so we wanted to hear the stories of what youth were going through. And so they were able to submit their stories through a variety of means, whether they're visual or spoken word or written. And then we ultimately put this artwork and these stories up. So this is some of the examples of artwork that we installed. And then that artwork informed some professional artists that we brought to Lynn. It's a quick video. So a bit of a different year for sure, but still really able to involve the community. We weren't able to bring huge groups of people together, but did this safely, did this with little pocket activations. This is Inside Out, the French artist JR, and we collected photos of the Lynn youth that were submitting the stories and ultimately put 137 of these portraits up on Lynn Community Health Center. This was the health center that was doing all the COVID-19 testing, and then later the vaccinations that are happening in the city. What was amazing here was you were having parties line up for their testing, and they'd see their child, or the aunt would see their niece being put up on the wall and suddenly cheer, and then the family would come back. So a very rewarding experience installing these pieces. The artist Golden, who we mentioned, we brought him in. This was a really corroded, dilapidated wall that abutted the YMCA playground. It was really drab and dark. And Golden, who's born in Venezuela, comes to us via Miami, put up what he calls his little monsters, and we were able to create a coloring book for these youth featuring that. This is Avoca One. We mentioned those professional artists that looked at all of the stories and the themes that were coming and emerging, and then that was informing of their artwork. So, and then now this year, so this is a redundant street in Lynn, Sutton Street. The city and the community have shared that this is a street that they would desire to have some greenery and facilitate a restaurant row. We've worked with our board and others to do early activation strategies to shut down this street, prove that it didn't impact traffic. The police have continued to call for this street to be shut down. It's used as a high-speed cut through. And so this is part of the plans and the work that we're doing with the city this year to facilitate this, being sort of a semi-permanent closure that could evolve to be a permanent closure and a permanent feature of the landscape here in Lynn. And then what's really interesting and what's been really, our traditional challenges is a big part of it's getting the canvases, getting the walls to put up the art. Because we've become really well known as despite the variety of work, we're sort of most known for putting up large scale pieces of art. Other communities came calling, and it always exceeded our capacity. So we were very measured in our approach and where we look to do work. But because these dialogues started in 2019, and because we worked on the walls and with those community partners, we are now lined up to do work in these 4 cities. We have the walls. In some ways, in some regard, the curation has been done, and these are artists that the community really wants to feature. So we're in this interesting place where we have the walls, we have the artists, we're coming out of, hopefully coming out of this COVID-19 and pandemic, and these communities really are crying out and want to see art. And so it's just, it's part of the challenge and part of the, I'm often hat in hand, trying to figure out the funding that allows us to put up this artwork. But it's an interesting opportunity to be in. Certainly we want to do this work in Nubian Square, some really awesome activity happening there, as well as Lowell, Massachusetts, again in Nashua, and obviously in Lynn. So, but thank you so much. So I think we can open it up for any thoughts and comments and questions.
Sorry, had to unmute myself. Al, thank you so much. I personally am incredibly inspired by this, and I want to sign up as a volunteer if I can. I have lots of questions that came to mind as I was listening to you. There's so many directions we could go with this conversation, but I do want to make sure that we give our audience first chance to engage with you, ask questions, or share their comments and reactions. So I'm opening this up now to questions. You can raise your hand or you can type your question into the chat. Maybe while people are formulating their questions, I'll ask you one question that came to mind, Al, which is, really relevant to what we're thinking about at the Harvard Art Museums. You seem, among other things, to really have developed a very successful way of partnering, of identifying partners. And I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about what you've learned about partnering. I mean, ranging from, your partnership on the funding side with GE Aviation and Payette, and working with the electrical union, but also to working with school children and youth and the technical college and artists who are embedded in the community. How do you go about looking for your partners? And I mean, is there a kind of recruiting checklist that you use to decide, who's really going to be a lasting partner? Or is this much more sort of word of mouth and grassroots and happens organically as you're working on a project?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's kind of interesting, I mean, as you do the work, as soon as you've successfully done work, parties come calling. So once we lit the bridges, we were inundated by other communities desiring underpass lighting, which coming off that project, it was the last thing we wanted to do was go back into do more underpass lighting straight away. I think when you talk about community, you're really looking at a three-legged stool as far as we're concerned. You've got residents and the parties that live in a community. You've the business community, and you've the government, and we have to play well in a sandbox and connect with all three. When we're, as we've looked at other communities and serving other communities, we've really looked at those communities that are challenged financially and potentially because of those challenges have underutilized or under activated infrastructure, which then creates challenges for that community. But we ultimately need to see within those community partners all three legs of that stool at the table. And so, you know, if we look at, well, let's look at Roxbury, right? We were invited in by community groups there, wide-ranging community groups, and some activists in that community, as well as an art community there, who were connected to the business community, but working on the political side. And this is something that, you know, this goes back 24 months, maybe longer, when those conversations first started to occur. And then the political bandwidth is sort of expanded, and now it's really desired. And they've done some fantastic things in Movie and Square. But you know, it's sort of primed to the pump, but it took a while. You know, if we get invited in to the community and we are looking at projects and we don't see other members from that three-legged stool at the table, then we advocate for that, and certainly wouldn't move forward on a project until those parties are there. In Lynn, we happen to be more connected, so we can see the work that Lynn Community Health Center and the YMCA and My Brother's Table and Girls Inc. and other you know, groups that are serving Lynn youth, and we're very connected to them. So they are the fabric of the community. But you know, I think that's really it's the three-legged stool and making sure those parties are at the table.
That, I mean, you've done that tremendously well, and clearly it's, you know, it's snowballing in a good way, because people are excited by successes and being able to see how you're impacting their community. I was so touched by, in one of your videos, one young man saying, "I've seen people smile who I've never seen smile before." And I mean, that's really quite remarkable to notice something like that. I think we do now have a question in the chat, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so Holly is asking, what role, if any, are museums playing in those partnerships? I had the same question, actually.
I mean, I think there's been, prior to the pandemic, a desire, and certainly I've seen, you know, museums have been playing a larger role in the communities that where they're located. So going beyond their four walls. I think with some of the social justice and need for sort of humanitarian work to be done, museums are playing different roles. I think there's been a pivot there, and I think we're seeing that you know, play out. So I see the MFA is doing work and being involved in supporting local and regional artists in a different way, and have gone beyond their four walls. I think I certainly see this group, the fellows and the friends here, really leading interesting conversations and having some hard dialogue. But it's so I think that's been, you know, where parties before were really centered purely on the curation of what was happening within their building. They've expanded out, and they're inviting other parties in to perhaps take part in attending galleries and attending the museum when traditionally they hadn't been invited in, and there'd be maybe a financial obstacle for them to have access to the museums. So I think we're evolving, and it's much better today than it was 2 years ago, and it continues to evolve.
Well, we certainly are aspiring to evolve. We've got a few more questions. Nina is asking, what are the sources of funding? You've named a few sort of in-kind funders. Are there others you would pinpoint?
Yeah, so the Bar Foundation, you know, we brought the Bar Foundation up to Lynn in 2017 and sort of shared with them, look, you know, we've got this underpass. We've managed to pull together a permit. We've figured out a lot of the logistics. We think we can pull off this art. The amazing thing was there was no member of the team that had ever put up large scale art None of us had put up underpass lighting or done any lighting projects, but I think they were impressed with the community gatherings that we'd had and that we'd gotten so far. And hopefully I'm being kind to anyone that's associated with the MBTA on this call, but to get a permit takes quite a bit of doing, and the fact that we'd done that, I think, impressed them. And then it was sort of we have many of the challenges that Boston has magnified, but you will see your money go to work here. We will find a way to implement. And so they got behind that. They took a gamble. The Boston Foundation did this, came in as well. So they were multi-year funders in a big way. But for every dollar we brought in, we had 85 cents of in-kind work. So it heavily leans towards foundations. We have deliberately not taken any money from the city of Lynn. So no local dollars. So, if there's CARES Act funding that can help us on some of the work that we've done around the wash stations, we'll certainly take federal dollars, but we haven't taken any local dollars. And that's true of some of the other communities that we're serving. And that creates a challenge when you focus on serving areas where the median family income is lower, and there's not necessarily local foundations to go after. You're not dealing with sort of high target areas for financial backing, and that's part of the challenge, but that's true of every, I guess every art and cultural nonprofit is and rightly so. It's a changed landscape. So initially for COVID response, money, philanthropic money needed to go to food and shelter and medical, and we totally understood that. I think as we're getting closer to seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, there is a real need for art, and communities are desiring that. And so we'll see. It's what keeps me up at night, though, is how are we going to turn the lights on when you get community groups together and they're very excited to see a project happen, and you think, well, shoot, it's Field of Dreams time and we're trying to raise the money. So it's always part of the challenge.
Well, yeah, these are the questions that keep me up at night too. So I think we're all in good company these days. But what you're doing, I feel sure will, continue to garner strong support. You have such a success story. We have a few more questions and just a couple minutes left. I'm going to jump to Lucy's question. She writes, I've seen on social media that your loan of the neon artwork is ending, and I've also seen lots of requests to keep it. What's the latest plan for the neons?
We can figure that one out. It's funny, the neon's super cool, but they were at the end of their life cycle, and keeping them going and finding parties that can work with sort of the intricate neon tubes is challenging and expensive. So we've just done a round of fixing them up. I'm not sure we can keep that. I'm not sure right now we have a plan that makes it sustainable. It was a 3-year loan. The owner of them has said that he would re-sign for another 3 years. We'd love to keep them up. There's something that's celebrated, and parties are crying foul at the thought of taking them down, but we'll figure it out, Lucy. I haven't figured it out yet.
Well, it's a really cool project. I hope it can have a second life of some sort. We're just about at the end of our time. Are there any last pressing questions? Liz, I see that you were curious about how artists were being selected for these projects. Can you say something briefly about that, Al?
Yeah, so, any project that's sort of multiple walls, we're reserving and getting walls for local and regional artists, as well as national and international stars. There's certainly something that we think there's a magic to bringing that group together. The sort of professional artists of some acclaim have tips and tricks for the regional and local artists, and then the local artists are able to sort of share some of the dynamics and what's happening on the local scene that hopefully informs those national and international stars. It depends on the project. Beyond Walls is heavily involved in the curation, but we also have community partners and others that filter in their desires, and we do rankings. But we're about to do an annual call for art, and depending on the community, there'll be different parties that help us choose those artists and curate.
Thank you. I'm going to allow one last question, because we have two related questions from members of our staff, and I think they're good ones. When you talk about public art installations, sometimes there are tensions between sort of art world taste, popular taste, and also sometimes there are concerns about any even unintended gentrification. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about whether you're encountering any of these kinds of tensions in your work in Lynn.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think you can't do this work and not have those discussions, and nothing happens in a vacuum, obviously. So how to answer that? You know, I think for us, for much of our artwork, we've said it has to be family friendly and not overtly political. I think in the last year, we sort of did away with the overtly political. We felt the times justified us maybe reducing that filter a little bit. But largely that was the guidelines. Those are the goalposts, and artists understood that. And then it's just art subjective. And, you know, when we were installing art, we were installing a variety of styles of art. And, you know, if this one doesn't appeal to you, ideally you can see one in the background and you walk onto that. And hopefully you like that piece of art. Almost all of the art is on private buildings. So though it's changing what's happening in the public realm, it's a contract between Beyond Walls and that private building owner or condo association. And then I would just, you know, regarding gentrification, you know, the challenges were already there. Parties were being priced out of Boston and moving. The reality was we were able to listen to a lot of the community-led organizations here in Lynn that informed us of these challenges. And it wasn't as if at the end of the day, although we knew that lighting bridges was a need, and if you have parties getting hit by cars less often, it might make that area more attractive. But the answer isn't, you know, the reverse isn't, we shouldn't then go and knock out all the lights. The challenge is that it puts it on to the public officials that have to create inclusionary housing practices and zoning that allows for the mitigation of what we see as the danger of gentrification, which is displacement. And so we can advocate as a group for those sort of housing practices, and push for that, knowing that that's not our space, but it's sort of where there is some mission creep, and you advocate for the right policies. But ultimately, and that's how we have to hold our elected officials responsible for creating, you know, great communities, because we've seen that. I mean, you know, Lynn is a great community. It needed some work in the public realm. The community will keep feeding us that information, but then we have to advocate for the right policies that mitigate displacement.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of a related question that just popped up in the chat is, have you actually had issues of vandalism at all? Has that been an issue?
It's funny, you know, when we were doing this, we met with, I went to a gentleman that runs Lynn Ladder and Scaffolding, and he's been in business for 40 plus years. And he told me he'd loaned me some ladders, but he said, every piece of neon you put up is going to have a brick through it within a week, and every piece of art you put up is going to be tagged over. And I left there thinking, man, wouldn't it be horrible to think like that? But also, am I being awfully naive? This guy's been here for 40 years. We've yet to have a piece, we've yet to have any neon vandalized, and we've yet to have an art piece tagged. And part of that was certainly that we connected to the sort of legends of Lynn's graffiti past and brought them back, and they'd left the city, and then they came back and did a sanctioned piece and ended up getting a key to the city from the mayor, which won us over with the local crew who couldn't believe that their heroes had received this key. But then I would just say that, there is an appreciation of the art, and all parties should have access to the arts. And, the great thing about street art is there's no barrier of entry and there's no rules of engagement. And I think really parties have ultimately, they've loved seeing it, and because they've been involved, they feel ownership to it. And you saw that. I mean, the city owns the art. The artists install the art, and it's their art while they're here, and then the city takes ownership of that. We've yet to paint over a piece. I mean, that's been the amazing thing. The building owners that were hesitant at first have then come back to us and said, can you please put up a piece on the other side of my building? So
wow, that's great. Well, we are delighted to be your new friends at Beyond Walls and of the Harvard Art Museums. And, I hope maybe you'll think about how we might be able to help you. Certainly it's a pleasure to shed light on what you're doing, and we look forward to scheduling some in-person visits to even better understand the kind of transformation that you're involved in. But up the road, maybe there are ways that we could help to provide some experiences for some of your constituencies. So, I hope you'll just remember that you've got friends at the Harvard Art Museums. Al, thank you so much. Kudos to you and your team. Thank you to our audience for staying with us. And I think I need to let everybody go and have some lunch now. Thank you so, so much, everybody.